In this step, I shall quote some exercises that render possible a deliberate passive communication with the invisible ones from a magical point of view. In a certain way, the methods resemble the spiritualistic ones, but the magician will soon notice that he is not training himself to become a person without any will of his own. Called a medium by the spiritualist, the magician may not become a plaything of uncontrollable powers. On the contrary, he directs his powers consciously and also learns to use them deliberately. In this respect, he considers the laws of the invisible world as well as those of the physical world. To further the passive communication with the invisible beings, there are recommended mainly the levitation exercises with the purpose to magically prepare any part of the body in such a manner that such beings can manifest themselves with the help of levitation. Let us begin the practice at once. Sit comfortably in front of a table and put your hands on it. Perform an accumulation of vital power in your right hand and concentrate on the fact that you are able to manage your hands and your fingers solely with your willpower, i.e., not the help of the muscles. Afterwards, let the accumulated vital power diffuse into the universe by way of the imagination. Now, begin with the proper levitation exercise. Accumulate the air element in the forefinger of the right hand and concentrate on the forefinger, becoming as light as air. Next, try to imagine that you are lifting the forefinger with the help of your willpower, leaving the hand with your other fingers quiet and motionless on the table. You must have the feeling that it is not your muscles lifting the finger, but that your willpower is doing it so. As soon as you have managed to get the finger up, let it drop by your willpower. Should you stop to concentrate while the finger is still afloat, it will drop instantly. One could try this only to establish how far the willpower or the muscles are intervening in it. If you are able to levitate the forefinger of the right hand with your willpower, you can proceed in the same manner with the other fingers. The levitation exercise is fulfilled as soon as you can lift and drop all the fingers of the right hand at your own will. Now proceed in the same way with your left hand and its fingers. Having managed this as well, try to lift the whole hand this way. First the right hand and afterwards the left one. Provided you can notice a success after several exercises, go ahead by lifting the hand at will not only up to the wrist but right up to the elbow. You can extend these exercises and lift both hands at once with the help of your willpower. Should the magician decide to extend these exercises over the whole body, he would succeed after a while, without any doubt, in raising his whole body by his willpower. He would be able to walk upon the water without sinking down. He could even ascend into the air with his whole body and accomplish numerous other similar actions just as it pleases him. It is of course obvious that he would have to practice these exercises for many years in order to gain the aforesaid success. Grand adepts do manage to produce such phenomenon without any difficulty, without being forced to do such exercises for years, because it all depends on the magical maturity and development. Never will any magician of a high rank perform a phenomenon of that kind without an urgent reason, and at least of all to satisfy the curiosity of other people. At our stage of development, we shall be content to move the hands and fingers according to our own will. Having reached this point, we shall turn to a different preparatory exercise which is absolutely necessary for the passive communication with the invisible ones. I shall demonstrate the practice as follows. Sit down at the table and rest your hands calmly on it. Now try plastically to imagine that your spiritual hand is protruding from the physical one. Put the psychic hand close by the physical one, or let it glide through the table to your knees. You have to regard the imaginary spiritual hands as your real one. In the carnal hand, there is now occurring a mental vacuum that has the shape of the external hand. At this moment, think that the carnal hand is quite harmless, being thus in the fourth dimension, the Akasa principle. If you did manage this for a short while, go back again with your mental hand into the carnal one and finish this exercise. Repeat this several times until you succeed in exercising the hands as described for at least 5 minutes. You can work on the other hand in the same manner. As soon as you have managed this very well, you are prepared to take up the communication with the invisible ones. We can see by now that the magic preparation is very different from that of the spiritualists who behave passively insofar as they take a pencil into their hands and write on paint. Whether the messages that are asked for by the medial writing or painting of the spiritualists are actually coming out of the fourth dimension, or the way they say it, from the world beyond, or whether they originate only in the subconsciousness of the medium in question is entirely left to the judgment of the magician. A hand that has been exercised according to our method has really been transplanted into the fourth dimension and can be seen by any being of that sphere that wants to use it to send the messages to our material world. As soon as the beginner has done these exercises, he is able to communicate with the beings of the fourth dimension. This magician will first of all try to come in contact with his guardian genius, his spiritual guide to whom he has the closest relationship. Every scholar of magic is fully aware of the fact that the divine providence at our hour of birth has given him a being with the purpose to watch over its protege, to guide and to inspire him. And in accordance with the development and the karma, this being can be a deceased person or else an intellectual entity not yet embodied on this planet. This being takes care of the spiritual comfort of the protege mostly up to the puberty period. The more man is maturing intellectually, the less attention does the spiritual leader pay to him, especially in cases of people who do not even remember their guide. The contact is loosened more and more. A lot could be said about the ranks of such guardians and their activity as well, but that would overstep the frame of this work. The magician certainly has got the faculty to communicate with his guide, to learn all he wants to know, and to receive everything he is in need of. Provided he is honestly interested in the whole problem of enabling his character and working hard on his magical development, he may be quite sure that his guide will first try to make himself known to him. Therefore, the scholar should aspire to come in contact with his guardian genius. Here follows the necessary practice. Take a sidereal pendulum. It does not have to be a special pendulum. A ring or a small object will do likewise. Even a nail tied to a silk thread, if nothing else, is conveniently near. Twist the end of the thread several times around your forefinger. The pendulum is swinging about 8 to 12 inches free in the air. Sit down at a table and put both your hands on it. The elbow of the hand holding the pendulum is to be propped on the table. The hand is to be kept upright with the pendulum swinging free about 2 to 3 inches above the tabletop. Put a glass of water, a vase, or any tinkling object about 2 to 3 inches from the pendulum. As soon as you have finished all the preparations according to these instructions, exteriorize your mental hand from the one holding the pendulum and put the mental hand close by the carnal one. Having done so, develop a state of trance in yourself for a few moments. The way you have been instructed in the chapter about mental training by recognizing yourself with your consciousness in the solar plexus. Therefore, you are now in the fourth dimension. In this condition, call your guide and ask him in your mind that he might manifest to you with the help of your magically prepared hand. Keep silent and observe the pendulum, beseeching the guide at the same time to indicate with one stroke of the pendulum on the grass a no, and with 2 strokes a perhaps, and with 3 strokes a yes. You'll be very astonished indeed to notice that the pendulum is beginning to move, giving the requested strokes. Sensitive people will even notice that the hand holding the pendulum has been moved by a strange hand. You will probably have the feeling that your own hand has become a glove with a strange hand in it moving the pendulum. Other persons again will not notice anything at all, but instead have the sensation that the desire is guiding the mind indirectly, moving the muscles of the hand, and hence causing the pendulum to sway to and fro. The outcome is absolutely individual and depends on the aptitudes. Supposing the first attempt to produce the communication with the spiritual leader should fail, there is no need to be discouraged. After a few more attempts, every scholar will certainly succeed in bringing about the communication. Once the connection has been established, one can ask questions to the leader, whether mentally or aloud, which will be answered with a yes, or no, or perhaps. The questions mainly ought to concern the leader himself. For example, if he is willing to manifest himself, or if he is already embodied on this planet, and such like. As soon as the contact has been brought about with the help of the pendulum, one can use a planchette instead of waiting for the strokes in the glass. This gadget is a circular disc divided in sections, each marked with the letter of the alphabet. A small circular blank is left in the center of it. The pendulum will point on single letters, and by spelling the letters, one will receive messages in detail from the letter. After achieving a good result, one can arrange for a bigger planchette containing the entire alphabet, numbers, sections with yes, no, and perhaps days and hours. In the center is a blank space to start from. For performances with this planchette, the pendulum is replaced with a small liqueur glass. Trace an arrow with ink or paint to serve as a pointer on the base of the glass. Now take the lower part of the glass between your forefinger and middle finger and allow the glass to be moved on the letters by the letter's hand. The arrow will then indicate the respective letter to operate an easier gliding motion of the glass. One can set up the planchette under the glass because the liqueur glass will move about much more easily on the smooth glass base. The scholar may find out for himself such and similar appliances. He will also find many constructive observations in the spiritualistic literature. All that matters is satisfaction of the most urgent needs of the moment. A further method is to beseech the leader to lift the forefinger of the magically prepared hand. Ask him to lift the finger once if the answer is no, twice if perhaps, and 3 times if the answer is yes. Noticing his success with the forefinger, try it with the other fingers too. One will notice that there is always a certain finger that is particularly easy to get on with. One ought to stick with the finger that is moving best. This, of course, depends on the flexibility. The magician will appreciate this method very much because it will enable him to operate a passive connection with the invisible world, either with his leader or with a deceased person. Even in a situation where a planchette or a pencil cannot be used, such as at a party, outdoors, and so on, if he has acquired a certain skill in this matter, he can even hold his hand in his pocket and get replies of yes or no in a vast crowd. Having managed all these experiments, one can take up the mediumistic writing. The method is as follows. Put up a sheet of paper in front of you and take a pencil between the thumb and forefinger like you would do for writing. Now push a rubber ring, not too tight, over your thumb, forefinger, and middle finger. You can make this ring by cutting it off of a bicycle tire. The purpose of the ring is not to have to concentrate entirely on holding the pencil. Now induce a trance in yourself. Call your spiritual leader. Prepare your right hand magically for him to write with. In the beginning, you will notice only some uneven lines. Later on, ineligible words, and after some exercising, words and sentences will come about. When one sheet of paper has been filled with the writing, change it for a new one. You can get a reply to every question. By constant exercising, you will acquire such a skill that the medial writing does not cause any difficulty at all. In this manner, you will be able to call deceased friends, relatives, and members of your family with whom you want to get in touch. The magician will be convinced that there is no such thing as hints and beyond, that there are only different degrees of density in the fourth dimension where diver beings exist, and death will not mean the end of everything to him, but a passing over to the fourth dimension. Finally, I should like to remark that there are several kinds of medial writing according to the aptitudes which I shall mention briefly. 1. The automatic or mechanical method. In this case, the hand moves absolutely automatically without the magician knowing what he wants to write or what the spirit concerned is going to write. Messages in foreign languages will also be received, even in languages the magician does not know and has never heard before. Paintings and drawings can be created as well. The inspirational method. Number 2. The most frequent here, the messages will be given in a sort of thinking aloud inside or outside the own personality. In this case, one practically knows beforehand what the being is about to write. By frequent repetition, this inspiration will become a loud thinking and listening in the passive communication. One will perceive messages from the depth of the soul or from outside the self. Number 3. The intuitive method, where you have the feeling as if you did the writing yourself. Any questions will be answered instantly. Nobody but oneself appears to know the answer to the question. This is a kind of clear knowledge. The hand writes words and sentences in full consciousness without the person hearing anything or being inspired in any way. The methods also can appear in a mixed kind, for example, half automatic and half inspirational, or intuitive and inspirational altogether. With which of the methods will be the dominant one will only be known after a long period of exercising. Each of the methods is good and reliable, provided you are using it honestly and candidly. Practice makes perfect. Now I should like to give a comment with regard to the questions one is going to ask, the means, and to the answers one can expect. First of all, the magician is not supposed to boast of his exercises and results. The more silent he is keeping about his communication with the invisible ones, the better for him. Furthermore, when choosing the question to be asked, you always have to consider that the beings you are contacting are subject to laws different from those who have to deal with on this physical plane. Besides, beings that have been living before on this earth will soon lose their orientation because our physical plane is tridimensional, depending on time and space, which does not occur in the sphere of the fourth dimension. Only highly developed beings are capable of giving correct information about time, events, future, etc. Consequently, the magician will first inquire about the home of those beings and rather prefer messages about the fourth dimension for the sake of his own education. Later on, as soon as the scholar has developed his spiritual senses, he will no longer need the passive communication with the invisible ones, because he is himself able to achieve anything about which such a being could inform him. The passive communication only serves the purpose to be convinced of the existence of another world which everybody will enter and live in after passing away. Magick Mental Training 6. In this step, we are faced with the meditation on the spirit. I have already been talking in detail about the mental sphere in the mental body, hence the spirit in the theoretical part of this book. Now it is worthwhile to look at the functions of the spirit with respect to the four elements, differentiating these functions which can be achieved by special meditation. The properties of the spirit in conformity with the four elements are as follows. The will is subject to the fire principle. The intellect, with all its parallel aspects of intelligence and memory, underlies the principle of air. The feeling, with all its aspects, belongs to the water element, and the consciousness, with all its aspects establishing the connection of the three elements, is subordinate to the earth principle. Look inward as into your own spirit. Observe yourself and the functions of the spirit and meditate on it. You must know how to imagine each of the functions corresponding to the element. If you manage to distinguish the functions of the spirits, i.e., if you have got a clear impression about it, you may continue. This preliminary exercise is very important because it will enable the magician to influence these functions with the respective element on the mental plane in himself as well as in others, to master and strengthen or to eliminate them. Another exercise is to ascertain for oneself that the whole mental body in the astral plane, together in the material body, like a hand in a fine silk glove that is put into a thick glove. Your hand ought to feel both gloves. The same thing is supposed to occur in the whole mental body. You should feel your spirit in the fine astral body, and this one again in the material body. This feeling is the spirit. Meditate on this problem at any suitable opportunity. As soon as you are quite sure that your spirit is captivating the astral body as well as the material one, feeling and moving it, and that is your spirit that performs all the actions through the two wraps. You can go one step further. Whether consciously, half-consciously, or nearly subconsciously, everybody is executing some actions suggested by inner or an outer impulse without paying any attention to it. The next exercise will teach you to accomplish actions fully consciously, little acts in the beginning, great ones later on. You ought to try to extend the duration of each conscious action. The wording consciously does not mean that one is all attention with the spirit, but with the imagination and the feeling that the spirit, with the help of the soul in the material body, is accomplishing the action. For example, if I am walking along the road, I do not think about the fact that I am walking, but that my spirit is walking and moving the astral and the material feet. The same thing happens to the arms and all the other parts of the body. If you are able to accomplish any action in this way for at least 10 minutes, you are mastering the exercise perfectly. The longer you can endure this without side effects such as dizziness or disturbances of balances, all the better for you. For this particular reason, it is advisable to begin with the first small actions over a short spell of time and to extend them as long as you would like. This experiment is very important because it will give the scholar the possibility to accomplish any action with a mental as well as an astral connection with the material body according to his working with the mental or astral sphere. Such an action is called the magical action. The scholar will certainly understand now why magic rituals never show any success with persons who have not been initiated or have not been trained in magic. Because people like these do not own the capacity for executing the ritual magically, i.e., they are not prepared to work in connection with the material stuff in a mental and astral way. Let us take the example of the magnetizer putting his hands on a patient's body, performing magnetic strokes, but without allowing his mental and astral hand to emanate at the same time, nor imagining that the mental force is pervading and influencing the spirit. The astral power doing the same to the astral body of the patient, and the material power influencing the material body. This magnetizer will never achieve anything else but a partial success because the patient does indeed consist of all three components, namely the body, the soul, and the spirit. That goes without saying for the magician, that the mental body is only influencing the mental sphere or the spirit in the same way as the astral body affects the astral sphere only, i.e., the soul and the material body concerns the material body only. This law has to be respected, hence it is necessary for the magician to adopt a mental as well as a psychic disposition in order to perform actions whether as a spirit or in connection with the soul. Once he has understood this problem very well and mastered the practice perfectly, he can advance in his development. The next task will deal with the magical training of the senses. First of all, a very important preliminary exercise. Similarly to the previous exercise, you are realizing in this one as well that you are not material eyes see everything, but that it is spirit that perceives all with the help of the astral and the physical eyes. Meditate on this problem as often as possible. You will have to imagine for at least 5 minutes that the spirit is looking through the physical eyes and actually does see. The longer you are able to endure this, all the better for you. You will become a master here as well by constant repetition of this experiment. Having achieved a success in this exercise with the eyes, turn to the ears by realizing that it is not your physical ear that is receiving the sound waves, but that of the mental ears that are perceiving everything with the help of the astral and the material eyes. If you can book the same result as you did in the case of the eyes, continue in the same manner with the senses and imagine the spirit, with the help of the astral and material body, is feeling objects, cold, warmth, etc. Practice this experiment diligently until you can master it with the eyes, ears, and the feeling. Should you wish to develop special facilities, try it also with the olfactory sense and the taste. But the keenest attention should be paid to the three sense organs of seeing, hearing, and feeling, which are the most useful for practical magic. If you achieve good results in the mental assertment of the senses, try to adjust your spirit to two of the senses at the same time. Begin with the eyes and ears. If you manage to bring it about for at least 5 minutes without any interruption, adjust your spirit to the three senses at once, that is, seeing, hearing, and feeling. If you can manage this as well, you have indeed made progress in your magical development. This preliminary exercise is very important for the so-called clairvoyance, clairaudience, and clairsentience, and ought to be mastered perfectly. The scholar will find the principal exercise in Step 7 of this course. Psychic Training 6. In Step 5, we learned how to project the elements outwards. Now we shall go further and learn how to master the Akasa principle with respect to the elements. It has been mentioned in the theoretical part of the elements originate in the Akasa principle, by which they are dominated and kept in the correct balance. After a long time of exercising, a magician who has achieved good results with the elements will also be able to control the finest principle, that is, the astral aether. This exercise is as follows. Take up your usual asana position and close your eyes. Imagine that you are in the center of an unlimited space. There is no above or below or sideways. This unlimited space is filled with the finest energetic matter, the universal aether. Aether is colorless, but to our senses it appears to be out of ultraviolet, near black-violet color. This is the color in which we imagine the etheric matter. You are inhaling this etheric matter and conveying it deliberately through pulmonary breathing to the blood. If you achieved a certain skill in doing so, execute the same operation by breathing through the lungs and pores as you did in the accumulation of vital power, but with the difference that you inhale the colored ether and fill the whole body with it instead of with the vital power. In performing this exercise, you have to retain the feeling of being united to the entire infinite space. You have to be, as it were, completely scheduled from the world. It is necessary to become acquainted with this unusual state of mind. In any case, you ought to avoid losing consciousness and falling asleep. Supposing that you do feel tired, break off the exercise immediately and choose another time when you are more fit. After some successful exercises in the whole body for breathing with the Akasa, you can go ahead. We have heard that Akasa is the primary source, the sphere of all causes. Any deliberate cause, such as a wish, a thought, any imagination created in the sphere together with a dynamic convention, is bound to be realized with the help of the elements, regardless of the level or sphere on which the realization necessarily has to be performed. This is one of the greatest magic mysteries and a universal key for the magician, who will understand its range only later on in the course of his development. The scholar should always keep his mind on his own ethical development, which will certainly help him to do only good and noble deeds. Our next exercise will be to win absolute control of the elements with the help of the Akasa principle in all the three realms. This exercise is as follows. You are sitting in your usual position, inhaling a stream of akasa through the lungs and pores and filling the whole body with it. At this point, I would like to mention that akasa cannot be accumulated in the same way as vital power. At the very inhaling, you must imagine that you are starting the control of the four elements. Consider that you have already got the facility of mastering the elements, and that they will fulfill everything you are ordering or wishing for, no matter on which plane the realization of your desires has to happen. With every breath, you ought to feel your mastery of the elements. The faith and confidence in your control of the elements has to be unshakable and impenetrable. You must not allow yourself the faintest doubt. Anyone who is working scrupulously through all these exercises will gain the absolute control of the elements after more or less exercising. A magician who has established the magical balance in himself with respect to the elements, having embodied his character and having acquired the highest virtues and ideals, will very soon attain this power. He will feel his faith becoming as firm as a rock, and will be absolutely sure of his conviction, which excludes any doubt at all. On the other hand, any person who has not been working scrupulously enough, or scholars who skipped any steps and neglected exercise, will feel doubtful about one problem or another, and the influence of one element that is keeping him in check most of the time will not tolerate to be mastered. Here and now, the scholar will realize what such high a value is to set on scrupulousness and endurance and in the execution of the exercises. There is no gap allowed to spring up in the process of development. Otherwise, the scholar will fall behind, and some of the problems could only be set right under the greatest difficulties. A scholar who is perfectly secure of his mastering the elements will soon notice that he is capable of projecting the elements on all planes very easily, outwards as well as inwards, so that all seems to be child's play to him. Having arrived at this point, the magician can turn to transferring the power of the elements into a suitable ritual. I have talked about this problem in detail already in a chapter about the rituals. The magician forms any ritual after his own liking by means of finger positions and gestures of the hands into which he is transferring the power. According to his magical development, he will certainly dispose of a sufficient amount of intuition so that he can pose the ritual suitable to the element in question. He can provide it with a self-selected word or formula and link it to a certain sound corresponding to the element. It is quite impossible to make a mistake here because the rituals are absolutely individually, purely personal. Therefore, the ritual that the magician composes for this purpose are not to be imparted to anyone else. Another person could attain the same success in mastering the elements by using these rituals, which of course would have happened at the expense of the power of the magician who actually composed the rituals. Supposing that a person who does not have the magical maturity makes use of such rituals, he would certainly suffer great damage and bring ill fate to other people for whom the rituals had been used. Therefore, be very careful and select only a kind of ritual that you can use in large crowds as without anyone observing it. For example, a ritual with a finger position in your pocket. The genuine magician will regard this warning as fully justified. First of all, the magician must try to compose the ritual for an element of the astral sphere with which he is putting the virtue of one element in operation, and at the same time another ritual with the help of which he can dissolve this power again instantly if he chooses. In the same way he ought to operate with the other three elements, thus creating by his power 8 rites for the astral sphere and 8 for the material production as well. As soon as the rites become automatic by a long period of exercising and repeating, will be sufficient to use the ritual only, which will make the element start working immediately according to the purpose to be accomplished. If the magician wishes the effect to be concealed, it will be enough to use the necessary revoking rite. This method should become a habit that renders performance easily and possible without any effort or imagination at all. I mentioned before that the magician is able to achieve everything through the action of the elements in the astral as well as in the material world. To attain this state of maturity, a great amount of patience, endurance, and tenacity will be required. Even then, When the scholar is developing more and more at higher levels, he ought to work at mastering the elements until he really becomes a true master. Provided he is possessed by high ideals and wants to do good deeds only to help mankind, divine providence will bless him, endowing him with unexpected facilities to make the most of them. Magic Physical Training 6. In this step, any special training of the body is no longer necessary, but we shall practically use all the occult powers that the scholar has obtained in the course of exercises, provided he followed all of the methods scrupulously and the practices really became habits. The scholar can, of course, deepen the exercises to obtain a better success. It is impossible to describe the entire practice of magic that a scholar could master eventually, because it would require another volume. I will only select some of the most interesting facts from the lot. In the meantime, the scholar has matured so much that he will succeed in the practice of lower magic without any exception, especially if he aims only at high and noble ideas. 1. Deliberate creation of elementals. In contrast to thoughts living in their forms in the mental or spiritual sphere, the elementals are entities with a certain degree of intelligence deliberately created by a magician. Such elementals are capable of fulfilling certain tasks on the mental plane, and obviously they may be looked at as obedient servants of the magician according to the purpose he aims at. Through the creation of elementals of the so-called elemental magic type, the magician can accomplish everything on the mental plane without any discrimination of his own or a strange sphere. I will quote only a few examples just because of the great variety. With the help of the elementals, the magician can influence the mind of any other person optionally. He can strengthen or weaken men's mental and intellectual facilities. He can protect himself or others against foreign influences, transmute friendships into animosities, or the other way around. He can produce a favorable atmosphere in associating with his fellow men. He can bring under his control anybody's will that is not yet developed or profiled. The businessman can enlarge the number of his customers, and the elementals can be helpful to him in many other ways. The genuine magician will always be inspired by good and noble intentions and keep the altruistic motive in mind if he is aiming at the highest level of magical maturity. The practice of creating elementals is very simple, an affair of the magician's imagination, but the following rules must be considered. 1. The elemental has to be given a form corresponding to the desire one wishes to be fulfilled. The form is to be creative, intensive imagination. The form, the so-called vessel or housing, has to be given a name of sort. Everything existing, whether in a practical shape or shapeless, does have a name. If it has no name, it does not exist. The task is to impress on the elemental with the help of the willpower and the imaginative facility. That is, an authoritative order that has to be given with respect to the kind of effect to be produced. Here as well, the present or imperfective form formula must be retained in exactly the same way as I described in it the chapter dealing with the subconsciousness. The effectiveness is to be impressed on the elemental regardless whether it is to be a question of a permanent or a restricted effect. These 4 fundamental rules are to be respected if one intends to work successfully with the elementals. I will render the practice even more understandable, and illustrative case may show how it can be done. Supposing the magician intends to enforce someone's memory or any other intellectual facility with the help of an elemental, the procedure is as follows. The magician imagines a universal ocean of light, from the luminous matter of which he shapes an enormous ball of light, compressing and accumulating it more and more with the help of his imagination until this ball has a size of approximately 12 to 20 inches. By this accumulation of light, the ball has become similar to the radiating sun. Now the magician impregnates this light ball with the desire and the firm conviction that it will exhibit the same power and quality as is supposed to revive and reinforce the desired mental facility, such as memory, eloquence, etc., in the respective person. As soon as the magician has shaped this mental sun or ball, he must give it a suitable name, say Lucius or the like. Besides, he is fixing the time when this ball is to affect the mental sphere of this person with the terms like these. You ought to work in the mental sphere until the person concerned has attained the desired facility in such a way that this facility has become a habit. Having fixed the time, the magician orders the elemental to dissolve in and return to the ocean of light as soon as it has fulfilled its task. Expressing it magically, the birth and death of the elemental are fixed in exactly the same manner as man or any other being's fate is. Considering the fact that an elemental knows neither time nor space, it may be directed to the mental sphere of the respective person. Its sending off happens quite suddenly, as if the connecting link between yourself and the elemental were torn. At the same moment one turns to another job, one ceases to remember the elemental that has just been created. One may also accompany the breaking up with a certain farewell gesture, just as one did while creating it. All this is left entirely to the discretion of the scholar who, at this present state of development, should be quite capable of giving such and similar instructions himself. The more detached from the magician that such an elemental is, the more effective it will be in the mental sphere of the person for whom it was created. It can work independently in the mental sphere and will not be restrained in any way by the magician's mind. Now and again it is advisable to reload the elemental to give it a great power of expansion. This is achieved by calling the elemental by the name given to it back from the mental sphere of the person concerned, rendering it more dynamic through a new accumulation of light and sending it off of it again. As soon as the elemental has fulfilled the required task, it will dissolve itself in the ocean of light. This example should suffice to give the magician a rule of conduct how to create elementals. The experiment described here often is used by adepts for the purpose of inspiring and strengthening scholars of low standard. Let us now turn to another similar topic that makes us acquainted with the so-called larvae. The difference between an elemental and a larvae is basically the fact that an elemental is created deliberately by the magician, whereas the larvae form themselves involuntarily in the corresponding mental sphere as the result of a strong physical excitement, no matter what kind of excitement this happens to be. The stronger the excitement is, the more mental material a person is subsiding. The larvae will become all the stronger, denser, and more viable, especially in the case of a regular and frequent repetition of the same physical excitement. This involuntary formation of larvae occurs in any human being, young or old, magically trained or not, regardless whether the person knows it or ignores it. If the physical excitement is fading due to the fact no attention has been paid to the upsetting affair, the larvae too will disappear by and by until finally dissolving itself. Consequently, there will be in a mental sphere a constant bringing forth and dying of larvae, naturally, at the cost of the mental matter of each human being. We are causing these events by our own psychic excitement. The reasons can be very different, usually fear, grief, sorrow, fright, hatred, and envy, and such the like, producing them. The shape that the larvae show depends on the causing of the psychic excitement and is always symbolic. Anyone who knows something about symbolism will be able to get a clear idea about this problem. For example, a thought of love will always be symbolized by a heart, a thought of hatred by an arrow or flash, etc. In spite of the fact that the larvae, these undesirable mental inhibitions, cannot be seen by the normal human being, they still do exist, and the well-trained magician can see them on the mental plane. In sensitive or excitable persons, the mental matter is much more separable and the reproduction of larvae is obviously easier and more intense. Such people wreck themselves, their health, especially their nerves, but they also damage their intellectual facilities and involve other highly suggestible people too. All kinds of mass psychosis are originating here. There is no need to describe mass psychosis in detail because everybody will have made observations and had experiences regarding this problem. The more one returns to the cause of the psychic excitement and the more attention one pays to it, the stronger the larvae will become. Any larva that is condensed very strongly will show a great deal of self-preservation instinct and will try to prolong its duration of life as far as possible. For this reason, it stimulates the mind of the given person, trying at every opportunity to draw his attention to the cause of excitement and to revive it constantly. Such a well-fed larva can become fatal to a sensitive or emotional individual, and numerous mental disturbances, such as persecution mania and the like, are the result of it. Many people are living under the enormous supposition of being haunted or destroyed by black magicians, whereas they are in fact victims of their own fantasies, or putting it correctly, victims of the larva they have been creating themselves. People like this usually will not find out about this problem until they leave their mortal frame. Only very few persons are actually haunted magically. Think of the numerous Inquisition victims of the past. No doubt there is a certain advantage for the average man, and the old order has changed, yielding to a new one. For if a man's belief is bad, it will not be changed by burning, but one has thrown out the baby with the bathwater without torching the roots of the matter and without verifying the higher laws. Now the magician will realize why such stress has been laid on the importance of introspection, control, and mastering of the thoughts at the beginning of the practical part of this work. Supposing he did not get the thoughts under control of his willpower in the course of his development, he would unconsciously create larvae that might become fatal to him sooner or later. Next, I am going to describe another group of entities existing in the mental sphere, namely the group of phantoms or phantasms. The difference between a larva and a phantom is as follows. The larva is quite unconsciously adapting a shape in the mental sphere, appropriate to the motive of the single or repeated psychic emotion, whereas a phantom accepts a certain form originating in the fantasy of man. Exactly in the same way as it happens to be with the larvae, the phantom is likewise reinforced, revived, and animated by the repeated evocation of the picture, regardless of whatever that might be, and it will be capable of influencing not only the mental or astral plane, but also the material level. Two examples may serve to illustrate this topic. A very remarkable example is the so-called magic persecution mania that I shall describe from two certain points of view, with reference to the phantoms. There are certain human beings with an innate scowl or with dimensional features, and whose outward appearance consequently gives the impression of black magicians, but who probably haven't got the faintest idea of any human science, to say nothing at all of magic. It is sufficient for any suggestible, emotionally excitable, or rather conceited person to meet with such a type of man, whether in business or in personal concern, and our test subject, as we shall call it, will instantly have the sensation of a strong dislike and apathy towards the antagonist. It can happen that our type is exhibiting a whimsical behavior without wanting to do so or even knowing about it. The first thought entering the test subject's mind will be that he is facing a black magician. Maybe for some reason or other, this test person is thinking too highly of this type of man, and the first step towards self-suggestion has already been done. Sooner or later, small, awkward, everyday incidents will never be cleared up, but the blame for them will be set on our type of man. From now on, the attention is stirred up. One is watching oneself, and the picture of the type becomes more distinct. Already one begins to feel persecuted, the eyes growing more glittering, his appearance reveals itself in dreams, the picture becomes more vivid and eventually emerges even in broad daylight. Finally, one constantly lives under the impression of being persecuted at every turn. With the help of a very lively imagination, the picture can be condensed to such a degree that it becomes viable even to other similarly sensitive persons. Feeling persecuted in this manner, with the picture continually working on his mind, our test subject may be argued into anything, even the worst. He looks for help, begins to pray, and does his best to scare away with the terrible influence. He gets a nervous breakdown, gradually becomes insane, and ends up by committing suicide or else in a mental hospital for the rest of his life. This phantom has fulfilled its task. How terrific is the shock, however, if such a spirit must conceive itself in the mental sphere that is committing a well-organized magic suicide. What a bitter disappointment. Our type of man, of course, has not the faintest idea of what happened, and will never realize that he was nothing but a means to an end. His face and his conduct were only the form, the pattern, from which our test subject created the destructive being, the phantom whose victim he became in the end. Such and similar sad examples happen more frequently than you would believe, sometimes faster, more drastically, in any cases more slowly, furtively, indecisively, but should you dare to tell the persecuted person the truth, he would never believe it, because the phantoms know well how to hinder its victims from escaping. If the guiding hand of divine providence leads such an unhappy, persecuted person to a genuine magician, who finds out the phantom's trickery, he will have a very difficult task to convince the victim to lead him to the right path and to teach him a different, normal mode of thinking. At certain times, especially if the victim is under the spell of a phantom, the helper will have to interfere very firmly indeed, now and again, even drastically, to restore the mental balance of the individual. The second example shows the same occurrence, but with a different type of underlying motive. Here, we have to deal with a phantom of eroticism. The birth of such a phantom, if one may use the expression of birth at all, takes place in the face, the beautiful body of a living person, sometimes only a photo or pornographic illustration or something similar, with the purpose of provoking the lust, the sexual instinct, regardless of the person belonging to the female or male sex. Provided anyone being in love, having no opportunity at all of satisfying his personal longing, the stronger and more vehement this yearning will grow. And at the same time, the phantom's intuitions will become stronger, because it is thriving entirely on the thoughts of yearning. The more the concerned person tries to resist this unsatisfied love, the more obstructive the phantom will become. At first, it will turn up in dreams and allow his victim to reveal the most delightful transport of love. A little later, it will provoke the sexual instinct and allow sexual intercourse in the victim's dreams. The pollutions produced in this way help the phantom to become denser and to influence the victim more and more, because the sperm represents the vital power that the phantom is sucking up like a vampire. The point in question here is not the material sperm, but the animal vital power accumulated in the sperm. The victim is losing the ground under his feet, his willpower is diminishing, and the phantom gradually wins the upper hand. If fate is not so kind to such a one as to have him enlightened in good time and to find the right distraction for him, the phantom's mode of action will result in more dangerous effects. The person becomes confused, stops eating, the nerves are overexcited, and such like. The love phantom can be condensed to such a degree by unsatisfied passion that it can adopt bodily forms, seducing his victim to an artificial stimulation of the genital organs. Thousands of people have fallen victims of phantoms by committing suicide as the result of disappointment in love or unsatisfied passions. This problem recalls the memory of true occurrences of the medieval succubi and the trials of witchcraft for connected therewith, a very dangerous pleasure indeed. In the light of the two foregoing instances, the magician may observe the activity of the phantoms, and he will be able to form such spectres himself But do not forget, sooner or later, he always will run the risk of being influenced or mastered by them. He knows what is happening in the average individual and how to produce these phantoms consciously in the magic way. But never will he be induced to execute such practices himself, always remembering the magic sentence, "Love is love, but love under a strong will." There is one theme left to be described, that of the phantoms or shadows. Phantoms are animate presentations of people already deceased. I will pay particular attention to this theme to avoid many errors and enable anyone to sift the chaff from the wheat. As soon as a human being leaves behind the mortal frame, it is at once in the fourth state of aggression, usually called the world beyond. Without any meditating substance, it is impossible for a being to operate on our tridimensional sphere, just as a fish cannot swim without water. The same thing prevails upon beings already passed away to the world beyond. Remembering, praising, mourning the deceased, any memory of our tribe to them will create and enliven imaginary pictures of the dead, which as a result of frequent repetition have a rather long duration of life. We call these pictures created by the living ones phantoms. It is this kind of phantom that manifests themselves in great numbers to the so-called spiritualists, evokers, diviners, etc. The spooks and hobgoblins also are nothing else but phantoms preserving, condensing, and thriving on the affection of attachment of the brave ones. As it happens in the case of the shadows, this can be stated without difficulty by citing a being that manifests itself in different places at the same minute at once through so-called mediums, which is nothing but a manifestation of the dead person's phantom. Because phantoms can be created by the hundreds, it is very sad that these phantoms always are mistaken for the real dead person by the spiritualistic mediums. A lot of mischief, self-deception, and fraud is carried out in this line. One can observe, for instance, that one of the mediums is communicating with a famous leader or general, a second one with an artist, another with a saint, in a different place with a pharaoh, and immediately again with an angel. Therefore, it is not all surprising that this particular field of knowledge will meet with a host of opponents and mockers, because of its amount of self-deception. No wonder that a phantom has such a strong instinct of self-preservation as to present itself as a vampire to the medium or the whole circle, and indeed becomes fatal to the neighborhood as well. Of course, all this does not mean that a genuine magician who masters the fourth state of aggression, the Akasa principle, would not be able to communicate with a deceased person or an intellect that is not yet embodied. I have already quoted the practice in the chapter about mediumistic writing. Apart from that, any magician is able to form a housing or a shape with the help of the imagination, transfer it into the fourth state of aggregation, and to persuade or even to force the true desired being to enter this form and manifest itself into the external world. This practice belongs to the field of necromancy or conjuring magic and has nothing at all to do with generally known spiritualism. The genuine magician will use this practice only in extreme cases, and he will not evoke a being away from its sphere, because anything a being of the fourth state of aggregation has to say or to fulfill in the material or astral world can be achieved likewise by the magician himself through his maturity.